As a lot of you know, I'm a solo bow hunter. I go off into the wilderness alone, and I don't have anybody at my campfire, so thank you for inviting me to your campfire to tell stories. I also want to thank Ohio bow hunters for inviting me, and also congratulate you on mentoring of a lot of our kids. You know, they're our future. You hear that a lot, but I was here all day and got to meet quite a few of the young archers and bow hunters that Ohio has to offer here, so thank you all for that. So before I get started on my solo bow hunting, I just wanted to touch base a little bit with my journey towards self-reliance. When I was a kid, I was a Boy Scout, and you learn, how to use a compass, but in the schoolroom. But you don't really trust that compass till you go out, hunting coons at night, and have to follow that compass back to your truck, so. And my dad was a good mentor for me. I also ran a trap line, and my dad always told us that you're married to that trap line. You have to check those traps in sickness and in health, so those attributes stayed with me as I go off into the wilderness hunting moose and other animals. I cut my bow hunting teeth, or my apprenticeship, in Chequamegon National Forest. Our family had some vacation property up there, surrounded by national forest, and I got to learn about conservation. We planted a lot of trees on the ground that my dad had, and we always talk about the romance of the hunt, and a lot of non-hunters don't connect with that. They don't understand that. But when you hold a tree in your hand, plant it into the ground, and then 40 years later you're up in that same tree with your son, waiting on a deer. I mean, that's the type of stuff that you just can't teach these people. So when I look at this picture, I see, my youth and that connection to the past. So I learned deep woods hunting in the national forest, and there's agriculture was around. I got to learn to hunt white-tailed deer in and around the agriculture, which was primarily dairy country, so there was a lot of alfalfa and hay fields. In the upper right corner here, you see blueberries. That reminds me of the sphagnum swamps and mosquitoes and tag alders, and having to deal with that and learning how to hunt in that, which was a great attribute as I go off into Alaska in the future. My early success, was fueled my passion for whitetails, I guess. So, I've hunted multiple counties in Wisconsin and Illinois, and we learned to pass up bucks. We only had one tag, so back then I started to pass up quite a few of the deer in hopes of getting a more mature animal. And as I progressed, I started concentrating on more mature deer, and like people talk about big bucks, they're bigger stories. Well, the thing about whitetails is you're connected to that animal, and you can see that same animal for multiple years, and the stories become bigger and longer. And I used to hunt from dawn to dusk. I get in like an hour before first light, and stay all day. It's one of the skills I learned, or the disciplines I learned. And that in itself lends itself to a sort of a solitary activity. And the passion stayed great with me. I started filming whitetails to show folks, what deer I saw. Some of the slideshows you saw today were bucks that I passed up from just this past hunting season. And then we had a great connection with individual animals. Like I said, my brother, he can't hear too good out of his right ear, and one day he grunted, and this buck comes up, and he's convinced that it's coming up from his right, but he doesn't realize that it's actually coming from his left, and it's right in his lap. By the time he sees it, he tries to rotate for a shot and misses the deer. That's the deer of the sheds he's holding in his hand. He's on the left there. So of course you tease your brother and so forth, but the animal gets to live. The animal gets to live to grow, become a bigger animal, and big enough for me to miss 2 years later. So be careful what you say. And again, solitude is where you find it. You can find it here in Ohio. You find that solitude in the deer woods. I chased the rut from multiple states, from Minnesota to Iowa when I draw, Illinois, my pursuit of whitetails, and I sometimes get lucky. Here I killed 2 bucks a day apart, and had to film them because we like to film. And my brother's telling me, keeping me honest, he goes, be careful of your camera angles. Focus in on, you know, the antlers or the face, and you don't always have to be there. You know, focus on the deer, put the subject matter of the deer, and you don't always have to be, you know, so proud and boastful. He would tell me, don't be so boastful. We all know you shot the deer, you know, so you don't have to always show your face. So I'm like, okay, David, okay, I won't be so boastful. I won't even show my face. Yeah.
That's impressive.
As a lot of you know, it's a scene from Primal Dreams, a movie we did with Gene and Barry Wenzel. And it's kind of done as a joke there, but kind of pushed the pendulum. A lot of folks say they can't hunt without their four-wheeler gassed up, and a lot of traditional guys like I am, you know, that's kind of goes against our grain. We're going to get out there, whatever it takes. And I'm like many of you guys. I'm no different. Kind of humbled notoriety. I got a chance to work with Gene and Barry Wenzel. And a lot of our film footage was used to create these films, Primal Dreams and Essential Encounters. And I wrote a book, you know, talking about some of the to answer some of the questions that I had that folks would see on those films. And it's called One with the Wilderness. So here's Gene and Barry and my two brothers that we kind of worked together and work on the films of those award-winning films. And as we promote those films, I used to get a lot of questions about the solo part of it, because I was contributing to more of the solo aspects of it. And I would get questions like, how do you prepare for a solo hunt? What equipment do you need? You know, is it more fun hunting alone than with other people? Are you more successful alone? You know, trying to query why I'm out there by myself and not with a, you know, a group of guys. Do you ever get afraid, you know, out there by yourself in the wilderness? Do you ever miss your family, your friends? How do you know where to go? Where do you start, you know? Do you have any friends? I get that some often. Do you have any buddies? And what does it take to get out? What do you actually get out of it? You know, and I'd come back and tell stories of these solo hunts, and I'd get questions from female co-workers like, how did you go so long without talking? Sorry, ladies. But anyway, so the real topic is my solo hunting, and I want to answer some of these questions throughout the rest of the seminar. So there is no template, there's no format to you get to point A to point B. It's just something that just happens. Everyone kind of goes on their same course, and of course hunting alone is not for everyone. It's not even recommended very often, and you miss the camaraderie and so forth, but I'd like to share with you some of the other advantages. Early on, we used to go with a group of guys and to learn woodsmanship and build enough confidence, you know, that I didn't know what I was doing, but build enough woodsmanship skills to be able to have the confidence to go alone. And a lot of that happened with our frequent trips, annual trips up to Ontario, Canada. There was a group of 4 or 5 of us, and we would go into the wilderness area. It was primitive weapons, muzzle loaders or archery. And we would go for 2 weeks hunting black bear. And there was no pre-baiting. You know, you'd have to just go in, and in 2 weeks you would bait the bears in the timber and try to get a shot at them. And as we got more successful, we wanted to keep the hunt in that activity. So then we started being more selective on more mature animals we would take. Some folks are not too keen on baiting, but some habitat only dictates that type of hunting to get it done in the 2 weeks. But what's more important was learning. We learned about blood trailing and animal behavior, and we learned, you know, what it takes to get a bear and skin it out, and fishing and all this type of stuff. So there's quite a bit of collateral benefit to going up to those things. And eventually, a similar group of us went to Alaska in the late 80s for a moose and caribou hunt. And this was one of my first of 9 different hunts in Alaska. 7 of them have been solo hunts, but this was one of the first ones. And since then, I've seen moose and sheep, caribou, wolverines, wolves, grizzly bears, all kinds of wildlife that you don't see in Illinois. But the first part of the hunt, we were hunting caribou, and the main attribute I tried to get was get elevated so I could see. And I would see caribou moving around about these ponds down there, and I watched one bed. So I creeped up to the side of the pond and got up next to him and actually shot this caribou in its bed. It's very important for me to see this photo because I'm using a Brackenberry recurve, and on the beginning of this trip I just got this bow 7 days before he went, so this is sort of a transition for me from using the compounds. Back then we shot them instinctively, open bare bowed. We didn't use sights or anything, so it was a natural feel to go ahead and use the recurve. And we shot the caribou, and then it was time to go on to the moose part of the hunt. We got flown into another lake, another area where the moose were. We were right down at the bend of that curve there at the lowest corner of that lake, and we hunted the hillsides and looking for moose. And again, we hunted them the same way we did our whitetails. We saw some nice legal bulls, but we were, I don't know about greedy, but we wanted everything that trip had to offer, so we were passing up, legal bulls, hoping for a big one. And the allure of Alaska was just real strong in me during that first trip, seeing all of God's creations, seeing all the fish in the water they were spawning and stuff in the fall, grizzly bears. But the main purpose was to get to the moose, and the moose aren't behind every bush, and we found that out real early. And to get a big one, I figured I had to go quite a bit further west. So I crossed this gorge down in the bottom because I figured the water was too wide to get across at a lower elevation. So I climbed up high, crossed the river, fell into the water, and it was covered with water. And glacier streams are pretty cold. But the things I learned from hunting all day in whitetails, to keep another extra set of clothes or an extra set of insulation wrapped in plastic in my backpack. So it wasn't the end of the world, and actually I got up, put on that, warmed off, and then kept going. Reached in the other side, and now I'm quite far away from the lake. It's hard to see from here, but I'm at least 10 miles from this lake trying to find the moose. And down here below in the willows, I saw a bull with a younger bull and some cows. And once the big bull left the cows that run off that younger bull, gave me a chance to get through the tag alders. And I got through the tag alders, using that experience that I had from Wisconsin. And just as I got to the edge of the willows, I was still caught in the maze of the tag alders, and the bull walks by at like 10 yards. He's just right there, clunking, going back to his cows. So I quietly stood there. The wind was perfect. He went back to the cows, and that gave me a chance. He was distracted. I stepped out into the willows and took a shot, and the bull went down in about 50 yards. This was the bow I was using for that trip. It was the old Oneida Eagles, and they pretty much draw like a recurve with no sights on it, and 85-pound bow, and he went down. But now, I just said I had walked 10 miles from that lake. That's the pickup spot on a float plane where we got picked up. But there was a new lake that I saw. It was 2 miles away, and we moved our whole camp over to this side of the lake, and I packed that bull 2 miles to a new lake that I saw a plane get up off from. So we make sure that the lake is big enough that you can take a plane up off of it. So we left a note over there on that camp and made a new camp over on this side. And towards the end of the trip, again, this was getting on 21 days up there with all of us on the caribou and then the moose part. The wind got real bad, and we were stranded there because they couldn't land on the big lake with a float plane to read our note to see that we had moved to this lake at the end. And my friend was like, hey, the pilot said if he doesn't come, you guys just keep hunting. So he was antsy from sitting in camp for a few days, and then he took off on his own and went up on a hill and started calling. And he got into another bull, moose, and got an arrow into it, got it into a rut craze, got close and shot the bull. It ran off into the tag alders, and then he starts tracking it. Well, the moose got up, saw him in his bed, and then he was in close proximity. It was still alive, and it charged him. So he turns to get away, trips over the tag alders that grow sort of parallel to the ground quite often, and the bull came bearing down on him and rammed his tine right through the side of his buttocks and kind of lifted him up off the ground and thrashing him around. So he fell off the point, and then the animal come back on him again. And it was a styled bull like this. It had wide spacing between the brow points. It didn't have a whole bunch of forks like the bull I had killed. If it was like that, he'd kind of like be a worm in your salad with a fork trying to stab him. So once it came at him the second time, he balled up onto the animal's antlers, and this eye is right there, and it's thrashing him all around and smashing him up and against the ground. The thing that saved him was the sphagnum moss, kind of like wrestling or whatever. They get kind of a bounce, and he was taking the load, but the sphagnum moss was keeping him from getting crushed by the animal. And eventually he's like, God, get me out of this. Start praying to God, or get me out of this. And he could felt the animal just relax, and he let it go, and he comes, he left the bull and walks back to camp, and we could hear in that great wind that's still windy, and we hear him what did you hear? You know, I think I hear him. He said he got mauled or something. So we go check him out, and he says they used the word mauled. So I thought he got hit by a bear or something, grizzly bears. We saw like 30 bears on this trip. So he said, no, I got a moose. And I thought, whoa, you got a moose. Did the bears take it away from you? Because he kept using the word mauled. But then he told us, and one of the main point of this story is we kept him in the camp, and he didn't cut his femoral artery because he walked 2 miles, and we were worried about shock at this point. And so we fed him some blueberries and put him to bed type of thing, and we were there still stranded for a couple more days. And then at the end of the day, the second day, I took a poncho, a blaze orange poncho out of my pack and waved it at a plane flying in the distance. And as it banked, it started to turn. I go, hey, they're seeing me. I was excited, you know, because most of the time we carry camouflage, but we're all drab, you know. So I just, for whatever reason, I had that safety gear, and it was game wardens on their last turn, last route of the night, of the evening, and they happened to see that, and they landed and took him out. But you know, he survived. He was okay. But normally that type of endeavor would scare you off. You wouldn't want to ever go again. You're done with Alaska, done going by yourself. But for me, it kind of fueled more excitement to get back up there and go again. You know, and as we plan our hunts, we start in the spring or whatever, and go into the fall, and all that anticipation is a part of the hunt, and it drives you. And it's, you know, we talk about it now. We talked about it all this weekend with all you guys. But when Colorado came, time to hunt elk, my partner dropped out on me. He couldn't make it. He couldn't go for whatever reason, and that was one of my first hunts of solo. I went off into the wilderness of San Juan Wilderness in southwest Colorado. And that was my first trip solo. Since then, I've been to Utah and Montana, and New Mexico, Alaska, of course, and many other states alone. And one thing you get from it being alone is, you know, you slow down, but you have to have, you know, be prepared is one of the slogans for the Boy Scouts. And here I have a piggyback quiver I hiked in 5 miles, and bring plenty of arrows. So when I get to camp, I cut the other quiver off. I leave 5 in camp, and then I hunt with 5. Know about altitude sickness and filter your water and so forth. First aid. I carry a can of Sternol with me in the pack. And your shelter is your life. You're going to have to get back to that every day. Hunting elk, I would also bring a bivvy, a small sleeping bag with a pad to stay on the elk. If they're moving, rather than walk back 4 or 5 miles. I was ranging out pretty good in the wilderness. So wilderness is no motorized vehicles here, and most of the time it's pretty high elevation. And again, you slow down when you're by yourself. You know, when we were hunting with my brothers or something like that, we'd push each other. Your partners would push each other. You travel a lot farther. But when you're by yourself, you take more time. Of course, I was doing the filming and stuff, so that stayed with me. And another thing I learned to shoot with my pack on. It's a pretty big day pack, but I got camera gear and big heavy tripods, and if I come home with any jiggly footage, my brother would yell at me again, so I had to always carry all this extra weight. So I blame him for my bad knees now, but I always never leave my pack, you know, because it's part of the lifeline. And always carry other items like a rope or for compression, or your knife with you on your person. And I was always ready to stay out in the wilderness overnight from camp, you know, so here weather can change, so always be prepared for that. And resting, it's still, you know, part of the hunt, you know, and I don't get bored. I'm sort of a daydreamer. As you've read any of my stuff, you kind of agree with that. It's kind of a wilderness retreat to me. Here's a quote from what I wrote for one of the scenes in Primal Dreams, and it's what I think of the elk hunting. You know, the essence of the hunt is simple and pure. The elk knows only survival. The hunter knows only the chase. Destiny arranges the encounter, but the outcome is written in uncertainty. So for it to be a hunt, for me, there has to be some degree or some element of uncertainty. Here was a friend dropped me off back in the wilderness, and then I hunted out from there, from the trailhead. And it's kind of a portal into the wilderness, this trailhead, and I would look for places in either literal holes like this, hard, heavy canyons where nobody or no other hunters would be trying to find undisturbed elk, or figurative holes. I would talk to the outfitters in the area and find out where they're hunting and where they're not. And in those areas, I would try to get in around their operation. It's about money to them, so they're trying to find places that are either not as far or their territory, and I'm trying to stay away from them. But I would use those techniques to get down in these deep canyons. And once I got the effort and got in there, then I would hunt the elk like whitetails. I would go in slow from the outside in, try not to disturb them. In the old days, I'd hear a bugle and I'd be off chasing. Here, I would hear a bugle and I'd just take note of it and keep going a lot of times, working my way away from camp, and then in the evening, working my way back to camp to hit those spots at prime time. If I was hearing bugles in the midday, I wouldn't go chasing after them. I'd let them go, but keep mental note of them. So I started a bugle one afternoon at 4 o'clock, and I got a response, and the bulls started talking to each other. Well, then I didn't need to interact with them anymore. So I just started sneaking in and let them talk, and got up to a ridge and then worked my way down the ridge, and the bull was going down the ridge, and we were kind of up on one side, and at the end of the ridge was a giant rock, a giant stone about the size of a garage, and he was on one side and I was on the other. I wasn't sure if he was going to cut across or what, but he started rubbing his antlers while he was bugling, and I could see the trees moving on my side of the ridge. We were that close, so I knew he was going to the end, so I got around the end of the rock and got there first, and then the bull let a full bugle and chuckle as he stepped out at 9 feet. I was already there at full draw, and so it's a real great feeling of achievement and accomplishment. I still was no place I would rather be, although I was left with five trips out of that whole packing the animal out of there. And there's no wasted effort. This is part of the hide I got from that first elk. And this frontier shirt was made, and I carry that elk with me into Alaska or New Mexico or elsewhere. Another point of the romance that a lot of the non-hunters don't quite get, the romance of being with that animal that you killed. And you can notice on some of the on the collars there's ivory from other bulls that I've scrimshawed onto there. And some folks who say, do you ever get bored out there? And I usually think a lot at home and my family and stuff like that. And I don't have a guilt because it's a gift. The wife and the family give me a gift to go out there and be who I am. So when I'm out there alone, to me it's about resolutions and stuff. A lot of folks make their resolutions at the end of January or whatever, but I have all kinds of time to think about all this stuff, like what am I doing at work and trying to treat cancer as my job, or why my son catches more bass than me, or why my youngest son was a Patriot fan, or what to get my grandson for Christmas. But so all that stays with you. And another tactic I use that doesn't always get talked about in the high elevation, there's a transition right at timberline. So I try to get as high as I can in the morning to meet the noon time. If I have anything going in the morning, I want to get high. Your thermals are rising, and the bulls and the elk tend to bed on a shelf just below the alpine willows and the spruce. And they're bedding along there, and I'm bedding along there. I spend my time there, and I'd call, and they would call, and we get to kind of know each other, sort of get used to each other. I wouldn't chase them like I would if I had somebody with me. We'd be real aggressive. So hunting alone I don't hunt as quite as aggressive. And one time I was calling, and I heard a bull respond, and then so I responded back, and we'd let that go, and I'd cow call and just don't say anything. And 2 or 3 hours went along. Finally, at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the bull was ready to get up and start moving and looking for his harem. And so I called, and I could hear him coming. Here he was coming. So patience, I guess, is what I want to predict for this. But it's right at that transition. We were at the same level. We didn't have to deal with the thermals, and he started coming. So I worked my way over to the ravine where he was going to come to, and there he was. I got behind a spruce tree and drew and shot, kind of quartering away, hit the animal, and off he went, So, and like other things that happen in the mountains, it started to rain. So the rains quickly turned to snow. I've been trying to trail the animal. It was not somewhat sparse blood trail. I hit him kind of far back, I guess, probably into the liver and into the one lung. And the snow turned to snow, and I lost all the blood trail. And so when you're alone and that happens, then you're dealing with, being depressed or whatever. You don't have anybody there to bounce it off of you, any thoughts off of you. So it's nice to have somebody during that time. In the morning I was met with 7-degree temperatures and 15 inches of snow. So I started grid searching, looking for the animal, do what I could, and listening to the coyotes or whatever. And eventually and at the same time the snow was melting off. Like Colorado, you might change 50-degree temperatures in a day, or so snow melted off. And one morning I heard coyotes in the different canyons, so I kind of checked that out and actually went up there and actually just luck found some hair, and the hair led to more hair, and eventually I found that bull. So I guess, what I'm saying is that frustration brings humility. You get humbled, the mountains will humble you. But when you find a conclusion, it turns into exhilaration. Yes, I lost the meat here, but I use that experience to learn from. Be cautious of your shot. It's not good enough just to kill the animal. We have to kill them efficiently and cleanly. And for here, it kind of redefines my notion of success. Success isn't always about killing the animal or harvest. There's all kinds of things that you see from our videos that you learn that you can take some success from. And in multiple years I would go back to either same places in Montana or Colorado, and returning to these places kind of felt like home. You have a kind of a new dawning, or find other places for exploration. Like the further you go from the pack trail or the trailhead, it seems like the further back in time you are. Some folks, how do you train for this stuff? You need to do some cardiovascular. I mow the grass at home in August with 80 pounds of dog food on my back. Neighbors think I'm crazy. Folks ask about the list and your equipment. On the right side, everybody has a list. They all have their favorite stuff to bring. But for me, I more focus on the left side as a solo hunter. Common sense and mental toughness to be out there. The romance of the hunt, that's what drives me. Like I learned from checking those traps when I was a kid. The anticipation of checking that trap is very strong, built in me. So that same anticipation of what's over the next ridge is built in strong with me. I would get a new pair of boots, and so I would take those boots and show them to my brother. Look at these $300 boots I got. I can really climb far with these bad boys. And he'll look at them and say, "Oh, they look a lot better than what Fred Bear had," Or I'd build a new bow. I built a new recurve bow or something, and I show my brother. I said, "Look at this composite fiberglass, wood bow I made that draws 65 pounds." And he would say, "It's better than what the Native Americans had." So the point is, those guys are out there getting it done with less stuff than we have. So for me, even though I'm part of Sitka, as part athlete and test their gear, for me, the left-hand side of this list is a lot more important than what's on the right. So I hunted in the Chugach mountain range in Alaska, and I passed up 17 bulls or something like that. And again, using what we use with whitetails, I hope to go back there the next year and maybe see some of these same animals. But the state closed that unit to non-residents, and then I was forced to find a new place to go, and I ended up in the Wrangell Mountains. So for Alaska is like the ultimate for bow hunting, because you buy a tag. And you can kill the animal with whatever weapon you want. You can kill it with the rifle. So guys that were out there strictly bow hunting, they're a true testament to what they want to do and what they want to achieve. So I was dropped off with a plane, dropped me off on a landing strip way up high in the mountains, and I started looking for moose, and there weren't any. So I started moving my camp downriver. Further downriver I'd go. Every 2 or 3 days I'd work downriver with hip boots and waders and so forth, looking for moose. I'd climb the side hills if I could, get elevated out of camp, trying to see where they are. If they're in low elevation or bad visibility, I would do a lot of cow and heat calling, trying to attract them to me. If I couldn't see, I'd pretend like as if we were in what we learned when we were in Canada, bear hunting. We'd see the thickets and stuff, and a lot of calling. Calling would be your only resort if you can't see them. Moose have great hearing, so that's the reason for getting elevated, but I'd also use cow and heat calls much louder. And again, I'm moving my camp each day. You can see a picture here, and I used jerky and eat during the day. I wouldn't make a breakfast or nothing, leave camp. So I hardly ever saw my camp during daylight. I'd leave at first light and come back and it's dark. Oftentimes there would be grizzly bear tracks walking by the camp or whatever. But I used mountain house food at the end, trying to stay fed, and then of course a lot of water throughout the day. Early on in the season, when you first start, their guys are in velvet, harder to see. Once that velvet peels off, you can see them pretty good when you get elevated. And there's also species that you don't have tag for. You have caribou, and I once saw a wolverine that I thought you needed a fur bearer license, so I just filmed the wolverine instead of maybe shooting it, and you find out that you could have used a harvest ticket on a subspecies that you had a tag for, so I could have used a caribou tag to use it for a tag for the wolverine. But so you got to pay attention to that stuff when you're up there. And I'm filming all the time other animals that I don't intend to hunt or kill. All sheep here, and finally I'm working my way further down from the river from my camp, and I started calling and I got a response. And 2 bulls came, one from above me and one from below. As they came in, and then they were maybe 100 yards away, and they both went silent. Both the upper one and the lower one both went silent. I couldn't figure out what happened, but I knew that from other experiences to get back to that same spot where I hunted in the morning. But so I got back to the same spot where I was in the evening, the first thing in the morning, and started calling. And right away I got a response from a bull. He grunted back to me. I was calling, and he grunted back. And this was a restricted size limit area, so the animal had to be 50 inches wide or it'll have 4 brow points. So when I first saw him, I instantly knew he was a wide bull, wide enough bull, and he came past me as he's looking, and he got like 50 yards past me. And then if you call to them, and typically I use a cow and heat call, real loud and long and drawn out, and then I follow it with a subordinate bull call, which is softer and more finesse. So once they get in too close, I can't go off with this loud cow and heat call because I'm right there. So therefore the bull already knows that there's a cow and heat, that she don't like the male that she's with. So I'm a subordinate bull, in other words. But this guy, he hears me and he's like, well, I'm bigger than that little punk. So off he comes, So he overshot me. Now I have to turn my face, and kind of like a ventriloquist, call, grunt uphill, and cup my hand so that it doesn't have a direct path to his ears, because I knew how much they can hear. And I look back and look at him with my binoculars, and you can just see his drool, and he starts drooling, and you can just see in his eyes roll back, and he starts rocking, coming for me. He's convinced that the activity and the fun is uphill, and he walks by me at 16 yards. And so I already had the paths cleared out from the day before, so I had pretty perfect shooting lanes, and he went down. And when you walk up to that animal and start packing, you're by yourself. I'm 9 miles from where the pilot dropped me off, but I had a satellite phone with him, and I knew that there was a new runway. I sound crazy, but I have a little bit of sense. I knew that there was another spot, another runway, another piece of gravel bar that he could land a plane on. So I packed the moose to that, but it was still 3 miles, so it's 3 miles round trip. I mean, 3 miles one way, so times 9. So you guys do the math. It was quite an experience. And I called the pilot, and he was real curious about where I was, because first I leave the plane with a recurve bow, so he figures that's easy money. Then I tell him that I'm 6 miles at downriver on a new landing strip, and I got a bull, and I'll have it out. But that eeriness of packing out that meat in grizzly bear country is just something part of the remote Alaskan experience. And one of the questions, you ever feel alone, but you're traveling with your experiences and your relationship with your friends and your woodsmanship and your confidence. So I don't always feel alone when I'm out there. And I sort of daydream a lot, and I think about people who have inspired me. This is Bart Schleier, a friend I've met, and he's pretty prominent large predator capture expert. He used to capture grizzly bears in Yellowstone, and he eventually moved from Montana up to Alaska. So he's a great hunter, and he didn't have any excessive ego. He made his own bows, and eventually went to Russia, because he could capture those bears, and they used his skills to capture tigers after the fall of the Soviet Union. He used his skills to capture tigers and collar them to see how much land they need and what kind of corridors they need. And so he was a naturalist, and he was also a great bow hunter. And he told me that not all naturalists are hunters, but all true hunters are naturalists. And that sort of sticks with me as we hunt, and the young kids, the apprenticeship that these kids need to learn more about woodsmanship and animal husbandry and animal habitat than just killing the animal. And he was good friends with Paul Schaefer, another famous bow hunter. Here's a picture of Bart on Kodiak Island with Paul on the left and Bart on the right. And he shot the bear using the bow that Paul Schaefer made. So there's some names for you guys to check out and Google their names and learn about these guys. Paul Schaefer and Bart Schleier, along with another guy that we met, Roy Roth. He also died on a hunt not too long ago. Paul died in a skiing accident, and Bart ended up dying on a moose hunt, similar to what I do, a solo moose hunt in the Yukon. So check out these guys, people that inspired me, I guess. I hope that they would inspire you. So 10 years after Bart's passing, he died on September 14th, 2004. 10 years later, I find myself going back to the Chugach Range, the place where I told you I saw those 17 bulls that I passed up, that the season had been closed for over 10 years to non-residents. Well, they finally opened it back up, and I knew right where I wanted to go. So I had a pilot drop me off on an upper landing strip high in the mountains. I'm looking for the bulls in their summer range. They still kind of stay high where it's cooler, and they tend to bachelor up a little bit, so you might find multiple bulls before the rut. So I got up in the morning, one morning, and saw 3 bulls out there sparring, so I hustled down the river to get to them. Another tip I use, I get the stealth wrap from stealthwrap.com. It's the stuff you peel and stick and put on your tree stands. I wrap that around your waders. It sticks and it holds up to weather. It'll be real quiet. It won't make noise as you're stalking through the willow brush and stuff. So I come across this bull and called one in, and he ended up, his palms kind of come up too fast as they left his head, and I figured he's a nice bull, but he's not 50 inches wide, so I had to let him go. I got some film footage of him. If you see my film, Chasing Solitude, it's one of those bulls I passed up. And anyway, so I still carried on the rest of the day, got to the higher end of the valley, still looking. My plan is to make sure I'm covering all the valley when I first get in there. And then eventually I'm working my way, stalking back to camp. And I get to almost to camp, and I look past the camp, and I see white palms up in the mountains, up in the hills. I said, oh, there's a moose up there. So I go past my camp and get in on them and realize, well, there's another bull. There's more than one. There's 2. And the first one that pops out, man, that's the bull I just passed up in the midday. So he had already moved like 2 miles down the valley. While I was hunting up to the high end, he was moving east. And so I came back and saw him again, but he had a partner with him. And so at first I see the bull and get excited and realize, hey, I already passed up that one. And then you sort of get down on yourself. But the second bull was real wide, and I snuck up on that bull, and they separated and give me a chance to kind of divide and conquer. I got to the last spruce tree when the bull started coming by, and he walked past me, unaware, and the shot rang out of the string and hit him with a loud crack. And you get that instant shock when you hear that loud crack, because you don't know if he hit the shoulder blade or the leg or whatever. But he just went over the rise, and I could hear heavy breathing and then quiet. So the loud crack of anxiety wasn't very long, and I realized that I hit a good shot on the bull, and ended up actually, after I skinned him out, he was shot through the ribs, and it broke right through the straight ribs into the heart. But here you are, getting dark, you're back, past camp, and now you got to skin this bull into the night. So with the flashlights, I skinned the bull and then corded it up for cooling. And in this unit, some of the units you can pack them out and debone them and adjust the size of your pack just by boned out meat. In this unit, you have to bring them out on the quarters, so all the bones have to come out. The ribs and the shoulder blades and the hind quarters, all the bones have to come out. When you're done, all that's left is this spinal cord and the lower ends of the legs, and the top of the rack I carried out. So pack day was the next morning, and he was taking out a front shoulder. You can see a kind of old school guy. I used a pack frame with my day pack, my hunting day pack lashed to the frame. You can see it kind of blew it out on the last trip. But eventually I get to camp and all is good, and we kind of have selective memory loss. You relish in the success and you forget about all the hardships of packing, whatever, 20 miles or whatever, all this meat. But by law, you have to get all the meat out. The meat can't enter the camp until you have the antlers can't enter the camp until you have all the meat. And I get this bear shocker. It's an electric fencer put around the meat cache, because you're breaking all the rules. You're not supposed to have your meat and your food attract bears to your camp, but your camp's near the landing strip where the super cub's going to land and get you flown out. So anyway, that's one of the tricks they use, is to put the electric fence. So the next year I wanted to go back because I saw like 7 other bulls during that trip and wanted to hunt them, but if you draw a tag for that draw unit, I'm not allowed to go back, so now I'm stuck trying to find a new place. So I found a new spot to go, and this was a float plane, lands on water. Here I'm looking out over multiple lakes. Now this is what my cup of tea. Each one of those lakes in the distance, represents a new landing strip, so I could hunt all the way out to those spots. There's a nice hill above camp. I had a raft with me. I've flown in on this trip on a beaver, so I could fly out with one trip with all my meat, not multiple trips like the Super Cub requires. So you get up on those hills and stuff and start calling. This is something I sort of invented. I bring moose in, and they have ears that hear very, very well, and they'll pinpoint where you are. So if they pinpoint where you are, where you're a cow in heat or a bull, they'll stop, and you should be there. You should see a bull. So then you just need to flash them. So I flash them with one antler palm, and they usually come on in. But sometimes the bulls get with the cows and they have a harem, and they won't come at all. So the only way to get to them is to become a bull, and this is one way. I have packable antlers that come apart there. There's a GoPro camera I mounted on the top of the head to record me getting charged by the big bulls. I was going to sell these, but the insurance was too high. So anyways, make sure you have something to flash with. It can be that, or a piece of bone, or inside of a white shirt, or a plastic bag. But here I call it the Pied Piper effect. I'm climbing out as far as I can, get up on these hills and calling, then moving back to other hills and trying to bring the bulls to me. Let them bring all that heavy meat to me instead of me packing it out. I guess I'm getting old. But again, one thing I would do is wherever I'm calling from in the last spot in the morning or in the evening, I go to that last place the first thing in the morning and try to call again, because these animals are coming in and they start to congregate around that area during the night. So I'm calling, and I got this big bull to come in. He's big, old. He's legal because he has 4 brow points, but he's not real wide. He come in right up to me. You can tell his face is all long and drawn. He's a pretty older bull. You see these epithelial tumors, virus-induced. So basically they're like warts. They don't hurt the meat or anything, but that one just behind his shoulder is a good spot to aim. But I felt kind of bad because I called him. I'm a cow in heat, long, drawn-out, lonesome calling, and he came all the way up from about more than a half a mile away. And I felt bad when he finally caught my human scent and realized that I wasn't what he came all the way to the top of that mountain for. And a few days later, I was hunting again and called in another bull. This is a younger bull. You can tell longer. His body is much smaller, and a long dewlap, the long piece of skin that hangs down, hasn't been froze off yet, so you kind of tend to be younger. Again, he was, close to being 50, but I didn't want to, make a mistake, so I don't want to come out at 49 and a half. That's not good. And I'm also trying to kill grand bulls, so I ended up not taking anything on this trip. But still, very successful. 2017, I'm back up at Alaska again. Another solo hunt with a Super Cub dropped off at a gravel bar. I'm out a different habitat, a different mountain range. This is in the Wrangles. And here it's kind of steep with a very steep side hill, so it gives me real easy to get elevated and see, and then also allow me to call out. I'm always looking for fresh sign. Now this is pretty fresh here, right? And eventually I get into some bulls. This guy had him coming in, but there was a ravine between me and him, and for me to get up around it, the thermals would have been bad. He would have smelled me. I had to let him go. But I'm calling blind. A lot of times I can't see where they are or whatever, and calling out with a megaphone call. In the morning I heard a bull thrashing in the water. I called a long drawn-out cow call, and I could see the animal below me, and I was like, "Oh, you got more than 4 brow points, and you're incredibly wide." So I was really excited to see this bull, and I was planning on staying with, no matter what, stay with this bull all day. But he heard the long drawn-out cow calls with the bull grunt, and he just come right up into my lap, and ended up shooting him at 10 yards. And again, I'm alone, got to pack all the meat out before the antlers. And I ended up staying another 5 days at that moose spot after the pilot flew my meat out. And I had some friends, some support guys to help me to get back in town to take care of my meat. And so that allowed me to stay and hunt caribou for 9 days up in the high country there alone. So I ended up staying 21 days alone, 20 days without seeing another human being. It's, pretty special place. I'm getting towards the end here. Last thing, people that inspire us, and a lot of these celebrity guys, but the ones that inspire me the most are the ones that can find a balance between their hunting and their families. Those guys are the true heroes. Sure, it's risky hunting alone, but so is, driving in Chicago traffic or whatever. I mean, it's something you learn and you deal with. And for me, I wouldn't be alive if I wasn't doing that. So fear kind of breaks over and doesn't show its ugly head too often. And guys go on some of these canned hunts. They're real small enclosures, and they can buy, a whitetail, or they can buy an elk, but they can't buy the feeling of achievement. And I'd like to leave you guys with that how we hunt is very important, and woodsmanship is something that has to be earned. You can't buy woodsmanship. And also back to the romance of the hunt. We still keep talking about that, and someone would ask me, well, what is this real romance of the hunt? And I would think and say, well, 2 lovers are separated by great distance as night falls, and one's spending on a retreat in South Dakota, the other one's in Wisconsin. But they look up in the sky and they see that same moon. They can both see that same moon and have a connection to each other through that moon. And that's how I feel a lot of times about the moose. I get connected to the past by looking at that moose and drawing my bow. You have a connection to your ancestors. The same muscles we use are the same ones they used, 1,000, 200, or 1,000 years ago. So we have that connection that the non-hunters would just don't understand. And so for me, that romance of that hunt and that scenario is what drives me. And as long as you go out and tell folks where you are, or let people know where you're at, or have some sort of a catch plan, either a satellite phone or something, it's okay to go out there. It's okay to go out there alone. Again, it's not for everybody. If you're depressed, you're going through depression, it's not a good thing to be out in the wilderness alone. It's not an escape from your daily duties and escape from society. It's sort of a rejuvenation or recharging of the batteries, and it's something I look forward to every year. So, all right, thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.